Messy or trashed, or what is that unit? When your tenant moves out and your landlord walks in, let's talk about that discussion. Stay tuned.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
What is behind your shoulder, Cleo Whithear, expert property manager?
It's only been here the whole time I do morning minutes. That's a marble Venus de Milo, the famous sculpture that is in the Louvre. She should be in Greece, but anyway, let's not go there.
In the Louvre.
Yeah, she's been in the Louvre a long time.
The replica, or that's the real one,
No,
stolen.
this is a replica, obviously. The real one's like 6 foot, 7 foot tall. But I remember we went there and Brian was like, let's go visit like Venus de Milo. I'm like, no, I'm not paying to see something that shouldn't be here. But we did eventually go there.
Oh,
Anyway, this one is all marble, and so is the platform she's sitting on. But they're so
that
hard to
is
clean. Marble's so porous.
that is
Anyway,
so woggy of
it's
you.
so woggy, isn't it?
Yeah. Just very quickly, who is Venus D'Amargo?
Well, she was part of the Seven Muses, and it was commissioned those big, these sculptures back in the time. And I think it was, I can't remember which world war or wherever, where they took chunks of the Parthenon away, and a lot of all the artifacts got stolen from Greece and taken to all these different countries, England, Paris. And there's been a huge movement over the years to bring back all the antiquities. But the conjecture is that if you do that for Greece, then they're going to have to do that for Egypt. And then, they'll have nothing over there. They'll have some oil paintings.
Another thing we learned about you today. There you go. There you go. You're into
A
your
box,
arts.
box full
Into
of
your
tricks.
arts. Now, Cleo,
Um,
tell me, this is a discussion you've just recently had with a landlord. This is a discussion you probably have quite frequently, daily with landlords, and it's when a tenant is in a property and the landlord goes, what? Oh, that's not how I left the property. That's not how I thought the property was in my brain. How does the conversation go?
Look, it comes to some real delicate negotiations. A client always wants to know that you're in their corner, and that's what we do. But we also have to be reasonable and in respect to the tenant that's been there for over 6 to 8 years. Um, the landlord does receive routine videos. However, they may not watch them for 1 year, they may forget about it or whatever. We go there twice a year, every year, and we see a property change over time, especially in a big house. Things come up, things arise. A landlord might not remember, oh, that retaining wall, I reversed into that 10 years ago, and then all of a sudden they see a chunk of brick gone and they're like, oh, did the tenant do that? And we have to then refresh their memory. So it is a comparable timeline of over, 8 to 9 years. And then there's certain things that we have to, as the property manager, say, look, that's wear and tear. You need to let that go. Or that's something that, has depreciated. You really should replace it now anyway. So it's a real long negotiation. That's why the bond claim is offered a 2 week period to settle all disputes. Because in that 2 weeks, you can imagine if you're negotiating a 10-year contract or tenancy, there's a lot of things you're going to go through.
It must be a delicate conversation where the landlord turns around and says, "Who are you working for? You should be working for me. You should be in my side of the corner."
It's true, and we do go to bat for both sides, for the owner predominantly, but we also, the tenant's also been there paying rent. There's maintenance requests that we have recorded that the owner may have overlooked or things like that. And it's our job to also mention that, on behalf of the tenant. But yeah, look, we're not saying that if a tenant's been disrespectful and damaged the property, that we're not going to, make them accountable by way of claiming money from the bond. We're not saying that at all. That is what the ingoing condition report is for, and damage is very clearly damaged. But where an owner feels damage and wear and tear are the same, that's where we clash and need to, have a win for both sides if possible. Because, things are going to happen in a property. You do get, for example, carpets that are stained. It's an accident. It's not like the tenant purposefully drop that cup of coffee, but the owner's not going to get brand new carpet out of that stain. They're going to get a compensation amount based on the depreciation. The carpet's over a
Yeah.
certain amount of years, it's a write-off. And NCAT won't give you any money for it at all anyway. They'll just say, look, Mr. Owner, you've had that tenant for 10, 12 years. Now's the time to replace the carpet. Zero. They get no money for it. So we need to refresh the legislation terms to the client when we're there. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to raise that, with the tenant. How did this happen? What's happened here? And then we'll come up with a monetary figure, not just off the top of our head. Through precedent cases, through NCAT calculations, we work out a figure that is fair and just. For example, when we're talking about stained carpets. There are other things that come up, like, if it's a wear and tear item, like a blind that's going up and down, up and down, up and down for 10 years, and that blind cord is broken, that's not the tenant breaking it. That's the tenant using it, and as a result, over time, it's perished. It needs to be replaced. Sometimes the client will go, well, they've not been careful with it. I've lived in my house for 35 years and I've had the same blinds and none of them are broken. And we're like, I understand, but there's certain things like if the balcony is, north facing and it gets a lot of sun, that plastic takes a lot from that, and it will break in 1 to 2 years if the tenant's constantly using it up and down, and it's there for use. So these sorts of things are what we negotiate at the outgoing with the landlord and the tenant. And they always
And
come up, the same things over and over.
so if it's not an experienced property manager that handles their landlord and handles their tenant and handles the situation, they go to war. Um, this arbitration will happen in a tribunal situation. It will cost the landlord time and money, and it will cost the tenant time and money. So I have to add, you've got to have a gun, an absolute gun of a property manager. And in addition to that, you've got to have awesome documentation documenting the evidence through that period of the tenancy. But something that I should mention is that I've often printed out the ledger for the tenancy with the landlord when there's been a bump like you're talking about. And this is how it goes. We'll look at the ledger and the tenant's
I
paying
love this.
40 grand a year and the tenant's been there for 10 years. And it's like, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, you've collected $427,000 and 752 and 52 cents. And within that, you've got to allow some of this expenditure. You've paid for your strata levies to maintain the outside, and you've paid this much to maintain the outside. You've paid X, and it's like you see that penny drop with the landlord where they're going, and if we go to war for you on this particular items, this will be the outcome. They're like, really? It's like, yeah, you're not going to get all your carpet replaced like you just mentioned, Oh, so a really good property manager is actually going to nurse that through, because that's reality. And when you get it arbitrated in a tribunal, it's the way a member's going to look at it.
It's true. And I love what you said with the ledger, because sometimes there hasn't been any upgrades in that time and tenants kept maintenance requests low. So that's another thing that we look at when there is a little nick in the gyprock whilst they've been moving or something like that. I really am confident to say that the majority of our clients are so reasonable. But on the flip side as well, being the property manager for some of our clients for over 10, 15 years, we know the tenant, we know the property, we know the owner, we mitigate all that during the lease agreement. It's not at the end, it's at the routine. If we've noticed something that's going to be an issue, we do it then and there. We don't wait till 3 years later down the track. We try to do that during our inspections. But if you're a tenant out there as well and you are mistreating that property, rest assured your property manager is going to put a claim in on your bond before, at the time you vacate. So if we know that it's not going to be clean, what we've asked to be fixed hasn't been fixed, that claim's going in there. And then if you wish to fix all those things in a very timely manner, then we'll be considerate of that as well. So on the flip side, we do have ways to bring the property back to a reasonable level straight away, be it a pre-final inspection, arranging quotes from our handyman to get things fixed prior, and just get an idea of what it's going to cost the tenant from their bond. And then some tenants are like, yep, fair enough, I ran out of time, just take $300 from the bond for cleaning, or yeah, I damaged that. As long as your property manager is working for you in this outgoing process and is a voice for both sides, I feel like it can all be wrapped up in a couple of days, from when you return the keys to when we go and look at the property, and then everyone moves on and it all starts again.
So, in conclusion, messy? No, it's called lived in. Chic, Mr. Landlord. The one word that I heard resonate, that everyone, that'll be the most heavily word used in this situation, that you have used quite a few times today: reasonable.
Yeah. And like the heading says, lived in. You've got to live in the property and you have to be reasonable with the end result. Definitely.
And there's a show. Thank you very much, Cleo, for your
Thank
advice
you.
today.
See you
You're a
later.
legend. Take
Thank
care. See
you.
you. Have a
Bye.
great day.